The first sound in the night was Leo's cry, sharp, desperate, then fading into exhaustion. Tessa shot up, her freezing hands trembling in the dark. She rummaged through the drawer, only an empty formula can. She shook it hard. A few mocking specks of powder fell out. Her throat tightened. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Outside, rain drummed on the basement window like someone clawing at the glass. Tessa threw on a thin hoodie, plugged in her cracked phone, and opened an old text thread with Ben, coworker. She typed quickly, "Ben, I'm sorry to ask again, but can I borrow $40? Leo's out of formula. I'll pay back Friday, please." Her fingers, slick with sweat, slipped on the screen and hit the wrong last digit in the saved number. She didn't notice. She only saw the message sent and silence afterward. She sank down beside the crib, cradling her hungry baby, whispering, "Just a little more, baby." 5 minutes later, the screen lit up. "I think you sent this to the wrong number." Tessa's heart froze. She looked up, blinking rapidly. Oh God, she'd sent it to the wrong person? She typed back in a rush, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. Please ignore that." She locked the screen, breathing hard, pulling the blanket over herself as if it could hide her humiliation. A begging text, sent to a stranger. Another failure. That's what she thought, until the phone buzzed again. "What's your baby allergic to?" She blinked. Who asks that? Why would a stranger care? She didn't reply. She powered the phone off, threw it onto the bed. A minute later, it vibrated again. "I can help. You don't owe me anything." That made her let out a dry laugh. "Sure," she muttered. "That's how scams start." She ignored it, but then the vibration came once more. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a payment notification. She picked up the phone. "Incoming transfer $10,000 from GC." The whole room froze. She thought she was seeing things. She opened the app, checked again. The number was still there, cold, undeniable. $10,000. She shot up, heart pounding in her chest. "This must be a mistake," she typed quickly. "I only needed 40. No reply. She dropped back onto the bed, clutching her head. No one sends 10 grand to a stranger in the middle of the night, unless they want something. She looked over at Leo, the little boy asleep, lips dry, breathing faint. She bit her lip, tears spilling onto her cracked hands. Across the city, Gavin Cross was still awake. The glow of his monitor washed over his pale, sharp face. The coffee beside him had gone cold long ago. The message he just read still sat on the screen. Leo's out of formula. His eyes lingered on that name. Leo. He pushed his chair back, breath catching in his throat. On the desk, a picture frame toppled over, the glass cracking across the smiling face of a little boy. That boy's name was Leo, too. And he had died 3 years ago. From an allergic reaction Gavin couldn't stop in time. Gavin braced his hands on the desk, staring out into the glowing sprawl of the city beyond. He didn't believe in coincidence. But tonight, among millions of phone numbers, someone had texted him by mistake, begging for formula money for a baby who shared his son's name. He picked up his phone again. The cursor blinked under the word message. His hand trembled, then stilled. He didn't know what to write, only that his face had gone pale, because for a fleeting moment it felt like his lost son had just called him back. Outside, the rain kept falling. At opposite ends of the city, a woman held her sleeping child and a man stared at the glowing screen in his hand. Neither of them knew. A wrong number text had just begun to change both their lives. Tessa sat motionless in the damp, cold room, the phone's light washing over her pale face. $10,000 still sat there, in her account. Real, not a dream. She tried closing the app, reopening it. The same number stared back. No new message, no request, no condition. Only a silence that made her heartbeat stumble. Leo stirred, his tiny hand clutching the edge of the blanket, his breathing steadier after hunger's storm. Tessa looked at him, tears welling. Fear and gratitude tangled in her chest. What kind of stranger would do something like this? Across the city, Gavin Cross still hadn't left the office. The only light came from the monitor's glow reflecting off the tall glass pane. He picked up the wooden photo frame on his desk, his fingers tracing the boy's face beneath the small engraving. Leo Cross, 2019-2022. In the silence, memories cut through like a blade reopening a healed scar. He heard the laughter, the faint cough, and the shrill alarm from that day's monitor. 3 years had passed, yet he couldn't forget the helplessness of watching his son suffocate from what the doctor had called a mild reaction. Gavin drew a deep breath and opened his laptop. He entered the unfamiliar number from the text. The internal system displayed, prepaid account, no registered name, no traceable location, no lead. Just an anonymous someone out there in the dark. but the words, "Leo's out of formula," clung to his mind like a spreading ink stain. The coincidence was unbearable. He reopened the chat window and typed slowly, "Buy what your child needs, that's all." No emoji, no name, just a short message, like an order meant for himself. Tessa stared at the message, her hands trembling. She couldn't understand why a stranger would care about her life. All this time, she'd grown used to her pleas being brushed aside. Friends avoiding her, co-workers going silent. Yet the person on the other end, faceless and unknown, had written words that made her break down in tears. She sat still for a long while, then pulled Leo closer, burying her face in his hair that still smelled faintly of milk. "Thank you, whoever you are," she whispered. "Just once. Thank you." Before dawn, she opened her browser and typed the name from the transfer notification. G. Cross. A flood of results appeared. Gavin Cross, CEO and founder of Cypher Eye Technologies. Photos showed a man in a black suit, sharp-featured, eyes gleaming under headlines like "The Silent Innovator Behind the Next Generation of AI Security." An old article mentioned that he donated millions to children's hospitals, one of which matched the hospital where his son had died. Tessa froze. Someone like that, why would he send her money? It didn't make sense. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe he was one of those quiet philanthropists who help people without wanting credit. But why her? A basement mother with no steady job, no reputation, nothing remarkable. She glanced at Leo and whispered, "We've got nothing they'd want." She typed a short message. "Thank you, whoever you are. We'll be okay now." Then she set the phone down and told herself she would never reach out again. Gavin read the message just as dawn began to break. He leaned back in his chair, the first light crawling across the glass and spilling over his face, tired but unnervingly clear. He typed a few characters, paused, then kept going. "You mentioned the formula type. I can have it delivered regularly if you'd like." He hit send. Tessa read the message while stirring a cup of watery coffee made from the last of the powder. She frowned. Who would offer to send formula regularly to a complete stranger? She didn't reply. The phone sat on the table, screen still glowing. What she didn't know was that inside a high-rise office, an AI system named Sentinel was quietly analyzing the conversations on Gavin's device, software he himself had built to interpret human emotional data. When Tessa's message arrived, the system flagged it. The levels of distress and loss far exceeded the normal threshold. A red alert appeared on his screen. Emotional trigger detected. Child-related trauma. That alert was what made Gavin stop working. Open the message again, and do something he hadn't done in 3 years, reply to a stranger in the middle of the night. The room sank back into silence. Outside the glass, the sky blurred into gray mist, raindrops clinging to the window frame, just like the night his son had died. Gavin let out a short, humorless laugh. Maybe someone out there needed help. Or maybe he just needed a reason to believe kindness still had a place in this world. Meanwhile, in the basement across the city, Tessa held her sleeping child close. The phone still glowed faintly on the table, the words, "I can have it delivered regularly," lingering there, waiting for a reply she wasn't sure she should send. A week later, as morning sunlight slipped through the tiny window of her basement apartment, Tessa heard a knock at the door. She opened it. A large package sat neatly on the step, wrapped tightly in silver tape. No return address. Only a printed label that read, "For Leo." She dragged the box inside. Inside were cans of the special formula she'd always had to borrow money to buy, along with baby clothes, diapers, blankets, and a few small toys. Everything new, expensive, carefully packed. She sat down on the floor, pulling each item out one by one, feeling both gratitude and fear twist inside her. She hadn't ordered anything, and no one else knew, except that one number. She looked around the damp little room, the chill from the concrete floor seeping into her feet. The bright-colored items lay scattered across the gray space, out of place, like they'd come from another world. A sudden unease crawled up her spine. What if that person was watching her? What if this was some kind of trick, or something worse? Tessa bit her lip, then opened her old laptop and typed in the address for Cypher Eye Technologies. Images popped up of a towering glass building in the city center, gleaming under the daylight, a world away from hers. The words, "Visitor Reception, Level 1, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. glowed on the screen. She took a deep breath, her mind made up. She would return everything. That afternoon, the sky was streaked with silver gray. Tessa stood in front of the massive glass tower, clutching the box of formula against her chest. Her hair hung damp across her face. Her canvas shoes soaked through. People hurried past in pressed suits, eyes forward, no one noticing her. She stepped up to the reception desk, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to return something that shouldn't be mine." The receptionist glanced at the box, then up at her. "Do you have an appointment?" Tessa shook her head. "No." The woman gave a polite, distant smile. "Then I'm afraid you can't." Her words were cut short by the crackle of the intercom. "Let her in." Everyone turned to look. The security guard opened the glass door and gestured for Tessa to follow. She hesitated, clutching the box tighter, and stepped inside, down a bright white hallway that felt more like a hospital than an office. On the top floor, Gavin Cross stood before the massive screen, watching the security feed of the thin woman waiting in the lobby. He recognized her immediately. The guarded posture, the wary step. He set his coffee cup down, his pulse quicker than usual. "Let her in," he repeated to his assistant. When the office door opened, Tessa stood at the threshold. The air inside felt cold, suspended, as if time itself had stretched thin. The glass walls reflected a faint blue light. The desk behind him was immaculate to the point of sterility. Gavin looked up, and their eyes met. No greeting, just a flicker of hesitation between two very different worlds. Tessa placed the box of formula on his desk, her voice low but firm. "I can't take what I didn't earn." Her voice was hoarse from the cold, but each word landed with quiet precision. Gavin studied her, a brief trace of surprise crossing his face before he answered slowly. "You already earned it. By surviving." The air seemed to thicken. Tessa frowned, clenching her fists. "That's not charity I want," she said, her gaze steady. "You don't even know me." Gavin stepped out from behind the desk, closing the space between them. His voice softened. "You think I'm helping you because I pity you?" She said nothing. He looked down at the box, then back at her. "I read your message. You didn't ask for a miracle. You asked for $40. That's not weakness, that's survival." She hesitated, unsure what to say. He gestured for his assistant to leave, then sat down in the chair across from her. "I'm working on something new," he said, his voice low. "A program that studies emotional responses in caregivers, parents, mostly. We're building an AI that can support them when no one else does. But my engineers..." He gave a faint, almost weary smile. "They've never had to calm a crying child at 3 in the morning." Tessa eyed him, suspicious. "And you think I have?" Gavin met her gaze. "I think you know what it means to fight alone." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a badge, temporary consultant pass. "If you'd like, I can offer a short-term role. Testing our product from a parent's perspective. You'll be paid properly. No pity, just work." Tessa stared at the badge as if it were a door she didn't believe could ever open for her. "I'm not your project," she said quietly. "I didn't come for that." Gavin nodded, his voice softer now. "Then why did you come?" The question caught in her throat. She glanced around the luxurious room, the spotless glass walls, the cold lines of light reflecting her thin frame in the vast space. "Because I don't want to owe anyone," she said. She turned to leave. Her hand had just touched the doorknob when his voice came, low and unsteady. "You remind me of someone I couldn't save." She froze, didn't turn back. But his words cut through the air like a blade of ice. Outside, the long, gray-carpeted hallway stretched toward the lobby. She walked quickly, her breath uneven. She didn't understand why that sentence burned behind her eyes, why it hurt the way it did. She didn't know he was watching her go, not with the gaze of a benefactor, but of a man carrying his own guilt. Inside the office, Gavin stood motionless for a long time. On the desk, the photo frame of the little boy had tilted again, its cracked glass reflecting his pale face. The words he'd just spoken weren't meant for her alone, but for the part of his past he'd never been able to forgive. The next day, Tessa received a short email from Cypher Eye. "Welcome aboard. Part-time schedule confirmed." She read that line over and over, dozens of times. No one in her position ever imagined getting a chance at a place like this. But Gavin's promise had been clear, without strings, without pity. She nodded to herself and texted back a confirmation. 3 days later, Tessa stepped into the familiar glass tower, this time not to return anything, but to begin. With Leo in her arms, she passed through security and followed the assistant down the bright corridor. Inside, a small room had been prepared. Cream-colored walls, soft carpet, a few brand-new toys neatly arranged. On the table sat a little sign, Leo's Corner. Tessa stood still, a wave of gratitude and discomfort mingling inside her chest. "Mr. Cross wanted you to have this space," the assistant said gently. He said no parent should have to choose between work and their child. Tessa gave a faint, awkward smile. In a world of pressed suits and glowing screens, that small room was the only place where a child's laughter could exist. In the first few days, she was assigned to test dialogue samples for Sentinel Family, a prototype of the company's virtual assistant for parents. She typed the kinds of questions every mother had whispered at some point. Why won't my baby sleep? What do I do if my child has an allergy? The software's replies came back with a strangely human warmth, calm, gentle, almost tender. Sometimes, it made her forget she was talking to a machine. Little by little, Tessa began to blend in with the team of engineers, young people who spoke in code and caffeine. They were curious about her, the woman with no tech degree who somehow understood user emotion better than anyone else. She shared small stories, how Leo loved soft blue lights, how he hated the sound of the vacuum. The whole room laughed, tension breaking like a thin shell. For the first time in a long while, Tessa felt like she belonged somewhere. One afternoon, while Tessa was feeding Leo, a young blonde engineer walked over. Riley, he introduced himself. I just wanted to say, be careful. Not everyone here likes charity hires. He left before she could respond, leaving Tessa staring after him. Charity hire. The words cut deep. She told herself she didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but the sting lingered all the same. That evening, while reviewing a set of AI data logs, she noticed a folder locked with an internal code. A small message blinked in the corner of the screen, Restricted Emotion Model V2. Curiosity got the better of her. Using her limited test access, she ran a few lines of command. The folder opened, and a list appeared. Dozens of children's medical profiles. Age, weight, allergy status, doctor's notes. She skimmed through the entries, then froze. Leo Cross. Her breath caught. She thought she'd misread it, until she saw the next line. Last update this month. Tessa sat frozen, her eyes locked on the screen. Leo Cross. Gavin's son. But if the boy had died 3 years ago, why was his medical record still being updated every month? Who was maintaining it, and why was it buried inside the company's system? Footsteps echoed in the hallway. She quickly shut the window just as the door opened. Gavin stepped in, coffee cup in hand, a faint smile on his face. How's the first week? She nodded, forcing calm. Good, everyone's been kind. Even Riley? He asked, one brow raised as if he already knew. She gave a small, brittle smile. He's honest. Gavin nodded once, setting his cup down on the desk before glancing out the window. Honesty's expensive here, he murmured. When he left, Tessa turned back to her monitor, but the folder was gone. A new message flashed across the screen. Access denied. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding. It felt like she had just seen something she was never meant to find. That night, Gavin sat alone in his dark office, the only light the faint blue flicker from his monitor. Headphones on, he opened an audio file labeled Leo Laugh 22.wave. A child's laughter filled the room, bright, fleeting, then dissolved into silence. He closed his eyes. He did this every night. Sentinel had been trained on thousands of sound samples from children, but only one of them had come from him. That file, he never allowed the system to delete it. It was the only thing left that still carried the breath of the child he'd lost. The laughter looped again and again until he finally slipped off the headphones, exhaustion pressing into his bones. He didn't notice his eyes were red. At that same moment, one floor below, Tessa was carrying her own Leo into Leo's corner. The baby let out a soft laugh in his sleep, a tiny, contented sound, and through the thick glass walls, it rose faintly, almost impossibly, toward the office above. Gavin flinched, looking up through the transparent floor. A strange chill rippled down his spine. He couldn't tell anymore which sound was real, the recording in his ears or the laughter coming from below. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. In the darkness of the glass-walled room, he could still hear a child's laughter, one belonging to the dead and one still alive. And for the first time in years, he didn't know whether he was helping out of compassion or out of an obsession to bring his son back. One morning, as Tessa was sorting through her test files, she noticed a conference room door slightly ajar. Gavin's voice drifted out, low, sharp, tense. No more real user data without my approval. Each word landed heavy, deliberate. Then another voice, the head of engineering maybe, replied, but the Tessa dataset gave us the cleanest results. The system learned empathy faster from real distress. Tessa froze. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest, the folder in her hands bending under her grip. She moved closer to the wall, holding her breath, every word cutting through like glass. Gavin's voice came again, quieter now, and far colder. She doesn't know. She was never supposed to. Blood rushed to her face. She stumbled back, the door creaking open just enough for her to see him. Gavin, standing over the glass table, both hands pressed against its surface, blue veins sharp under the reflected light. He was silent, listening as the engineers presented charts and graphs, all stamped with her name. And Leo's. In the source data section. She didn't need to hear another word. Her whole body trembling, Tessa shoved the door open. The bang echoed through the room, snapping every head around. "You helped me," she said, her voice breaking, "to make us your experiment?" No one spoke. Gavin stood frozen, his face hardening as though he'd been caught mid-thought. "Tessa," he started, but she cut him off. "All that kindness, all those packages, it was just testing material?" He took a step toward her, confusion and guilt flashing in his eyes. "It wasn't supposed to go this way," he said softly, voice rough. "I never meant for you to be part of that." "Then what was I?" she demanded, her throat tightening. "A data point? Another number for your AI?" Gavin looked down, silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, each word slow, deliberate, like a confession. "When my son died, I swore I'd build something that could prevent it. A system that could detect danger before parents even realized. That's why I created Guardian AI. But some of my developers, they sold access to private data to a hospital network, without my consent." The room went still. One of the young engineers stared at the floor, afraid to breathe. Gavin went on, his eyes fixed on Tessa. "Your data was flagged months ago. Someone scraped your posts about Leo's allergy from an old parenting forum. When the system detected distress, it triggered an alert. That's how your message reached me that night. I wasn't the one who found you. The AI did." Tessa stepped back, the blood draining from her face. "So the text wasn't even a mistake." He shook his head, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "It was half mistake, half fate," he said quietly. "The system scanned your number because it matched a profile in the leaked dataset. When your message came, it triggered an emergency flag, and when I saw the name Leo," he paused, eyes distant, voice trembling just slightly, "I thought maybe this was the universe giving me one more chance." Her mind spun. Everything from the past week, the money, the job, the kindness, all of it traced back to a chain of algorithms. She wasn't a miracle case. She was data, a test subject, the proof of concept for a man trying to atone. "Do you even hear yourself?" she said, her voice cracking. "You used my pain to fix yours. Maybe," Gavin whispered. "But without that night, you and Leo might not have had what you needed, and I might still be lost." Her breath caught, fury rising so fast it almost choked her. She clenched her fists, but the tears came before the words did. "You don't get to call that saving." One of the engineers tried to speak. "Sir, should we?" Gavin lifted a hand, silencing him. His gaze stayed fixed on Tessa, pleading, desperate, hollow. "You have every right to hate me," he said quietly. "But believe me, I never wanted to exploit you. I wanted to stop the people who did. You were part of the leak I was chasing. That's why I froze when I saw your text. It wasn't just your message, it was the alert code flashing your number. I knew someone was still feeding real families into the system." Tessa's breathing quickened, each word cutting deeper. "So from the start, you already knew me?" "Not you," Gavin said softly, "just your pain." The air seemed to splinter between them. She didn't reply, didn't shout. She simply turned toward the door, her steps slow, deliberate. But before leaving, she looked back at him, eyes sharp through the tears. "You wanted to build something to prevent suffering," she said. "Congratulations, now you've made more of it." The door slammed shut. No one in the room moved. Gavin stood motionless under the white light, his face hollow, like a man who had just lost everything all over again. Downstairs, Tessa walked briskly through the lobby. Employees stepped aside, staring as she passed, their curiosity hushed by something heavier than gossip. In her hand, she still clutched her temporary ID badge, the plastic edge pressed deep into her palm. She pushed through the glass doors into the blazing afternoon. Sunlight stabbed through the windows, too bright to see anything clearly. Everything she'd begun to believe in, every flicker of trust she'd let herself rebuild, had crumbled in minutes. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, the woman who'd been saved, or the experiment chosen by an algorithm. High above, behind mirrored glass, Gavin stood watching her leave. On the monitor beside him, Sentinel flashed a new alert. "Subject Tessa, distress level, critical." He switched the screen off. No orders, no explanations, only his reflection remained, pale, hollow, as if all the light in the room had been pulled out of him. A month later, the name Cypher Eye was just a blurred memory in Tessa's mind. She had left the company without goodbyes, without an address, without a trace. The basement apartment had returned to its old rhythm. The smell of formula, the slow drip of a leaky pipe, the cold rising from the tiles. But this time, the emptiness inside her wasn't fear. It was something quieter. Something between ache and release. Leo had grown a little. He could now say mama in his soft, babbling voice. Every time he laughed, Tessa remembered standing in that glass room, hearing Gavin say, "You remind me of someone I couldn't save." That line had once hurt her, but now, when she thought of it, the anger was gone. Some wounds, she realized, don't need forgiveness, just time to stop bleeding. That afternoon, as she folded clothes, a knock came at the door. On the step sat a small parcel, neatly wrapped, no return label. Inside was an old silver audio player, its surface scratched with age. There was also a folded note written in a man's slanted hand. "I built machines to fix what I broke. You reminded me that some things are meant to heal, not to be rebuilt." GC. She stared at the words, her hands trembling. Next to the player was a small audio file labeled Leo Laugh 22.wave. She pressed play, and a child's laughter filled the room, bright, weightless, impossibly pure. Not her Leo's laughter, but his, Leo Cross, the boy who was gone. Tessa sat still, tears sliding down her face. Not from pity, not from fear, but because, for the first time, she felt seen. Not as a data sample, not as a variable in someone's experiment, but as a human being trying to live, to love, and to get it right despite every wrong turn. She set the player down and gathered her son into her arms. Outside the window, the first light of dawn spread softly across the damp wall, glinting on Leo's round cheeks, warm, alive, and full of breath. She carried her son out onto the balcony, gazing toward the horizon where the sky was beginning to glow. No car horns, no noise, only the wind brushing through the curtain and a rare, fragile peace. On the table behind her, the phone lit up with a soft chime. A notification blinked across the screen. Guardian AI, public beta launch. Dedicated to Leo Cross and all mothers who fight alone. Tessa stared at the words, a faint smile flickering across her lips. She didn't know where Gavin was now, or whether he had truly found forgiveness. But she knew this, even if it all began in error, he had chosen to end it with sincerity. She whispered to her son, "You see, baby, sometimes, even wrong numbers lead us home." Leo laughed, a bright, ringing sound that carried into the morning air. Tessa closed her eyes and breathed in, the scent of sunlight, of milk, and of all the words left unspoken. And in that quiet moment, she understood. Sometimes the wrong kind of help is the only right thing left. Kindness doesn't need to be pure, it just needs to be real.